and we are here today for training on hydrocarbon refrigerants. And we're going to look at using R290 and R600a in light commercial refrigeration equipment. The next thing we'll talk about is compressor changes, and specifically some of the things that are different and the things that are similar about the compressors used for R290 and R600a, and then also with the systems. Some of these things that are impacted include the displacement, motor changes, the lubricant, and the electrical components. For the compressor displacement, you'll see that R290 is actually very similar to R404 and R134. It's usually a bit bigger compared to R404 and a bit smaller compared to R134. On this chart right here, we're looking at a medium back pressure application. If we update the chart, now we're looking at a low back pressure application, and it's still very similar. The percentages change a bit, but it's still right in between R404 and R134. Now for this next update, we're looking at operating pressure. And you can see again, R290 is right in between R404 and R134. This change is not like when HVAC systems changed over to R410. Nothing different in pressure like that. It's very similar to the pressures that you're used to seeing. Another change that we can see here in this chart is the IEC standards that designate how much of a refrigerant charge we can use. This is a bit different just because you're not used to seeing these charge limits for other equipment in your older traditional refrigerants. But otherwise, as we've discussed before, it's a 5.3 ounce charge or 150 grams for right now here in the US. On this chart, you'll see some of the IEC standards for the electrical equipment. So this is for explosive atmospheres and the electrical apparatus in an explosive gas atmosphere. This is where you'll start to see the real changes between an R290 or an R600a system and the systems that we're used to working on out there. What this means is that all of the electrical components inside that system need to be specifically designed to be in a flammable gas atmosphere. So the overload protector that you'll be using now may look a bit different than it did in the past. It just depends on the actual piece of equipment and where that piece of equipment is inside the cabinet. So you can see on this chart the difference that I'm talking about. On the right hand side is a 3/4 round or clicks-on overload, and that's one that will be used on our R134 or 404 compressors. On the left hand side is what a new one's going to look like. So everything that is potentially spark producing is now enclosed. In the middle we have a 4TM type overload protector, and it was already inherently safe. Just needed to be approved per these IEC standards. Now we're looking at the entire R290 system. So the system is actually quite similar to what it was for your traditional refrigerants. The first change that you'll notice is the R290 warning label that needs to be attached to the compressor to let you know that there's a flammable refrigerant inside the compressor. In the US, we also have a standard that the process tube needs to be red or pink. So you'll either see it painted red or pink, or you'll see a sleeve on it that's going to be red or pink. You can use both of these things to identify immediately upon approaching that equipment that there's a flammable gas inside. The condenser and the evaporator are going to be very similar to what you're used to seeing in a traditional system. The condenser might be a bit smaller to account for the small refrigerant charge, but otherwise very similar. The piping is going to be pretty much the same. The filter dryer is going to be pretty much the same. It does need to be specifically approved for use on R290, but there can be universal filter dryers out there that you can use on all these systems. The capillary tube is going to be a bit smaller, could be 10 to 15% shorter, but where you really start to see the changes is on the bottom of this chart when you're looking at the expansion valve and then the electrical pieces such as the fan motor, other electrical components, the fan blades. All of these components are the ones that need to be approved per the IEC standards to make sure that they are not spark producing. So in summary, the biggest changes that you'll see in these systems is when we look at the expansion valve, fan motors, fan blades, and the electrical components. All these components really need to be specifically designed for this system. Finally, looking at the lubricants, R290 is actually totally miscible with POE, alkyl benzene, and mineral oil. So you could really use any of these. What we chose to use it in Bracco is POE, which is what you're used to seeing in refrigerants like R134 and R404. So it's always best to check your data sheet to make sure that you have the right oil and in the right amount.